Welcome back to Bible Shorts, episode 104, 5 Loaves and 2 Fish, Luke chapter 9. Last week, in Luke chapter 8, we learned how Jesus brought a 12-year-old girl back from the dead, and we pondered how far that story had spread, even though Jesus had asked her mother and father not to reveal to anyone what he had done. Now, today, in Luke chapter 9, Jesus is back with his disciples. He called the 12 together and gave them power and authority to drive out evil spirits and to cure diseases. And he sent them out to proclaim the kingdom of God and to heal the sick. Whatever house you enter, stay there until you leave that town. If people do not welcome you, leave their town and shake the dust off your feet as a testimony against them. So they set out and went 2 by 2 from village to village, proclaiming the good news and healing people everywhere. Now Herod Antipas, whom the Romans had put in charge of the Galilee area, heard about all that was going on, and he was perplexed, because some were saying that John the Baptist had been raised from the dead. Others were claiming that Elijah the prophet had appeared, and still others that a different prophet of long ago had come back to life. But Herod said, "I beheaded John. Who then is this I hear such things about?" And he tried, but failed to see Jesus. When the 12 apostles returned from their travels to the neighboring villages, they reported to Jesus what they had done. Jesus and the disciples then withdrew by themselves near a town called Bethsaida, but the crowds learned about it and followed him. Jesus welcomed the crowd and spoke to them about the kingdom of God and healed those who needed healing. Late in the afternoon, the 12 came to him and said, "Send the crowd away so they can go to the surrounding villages and countryside and find food and lodging, because we are in a remote place here." Jesus replied, "You give them something to eat." They answered, "We have only 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish, unless we go and buy food for all this crowd." Jesus said to his disciples, "Have the people sit down in groups of about 50 each." The disciples did so, and everyone sat down. Luke says around 5,000 people were there. Taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and broke them. Then he gave them to the disciples to distribute to the people. They all ate and were satisfied. And the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces that were left over. 12 disciples, 12 baskets. What's the connection? One day, as Jesus was praying in private and his disciples were with him, he asked them, "Who do the crowds say I am?" They replied, "Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others that one of the prophets of long ago has come back to life." "But what about you?" he asked. "Who do you say that I am?" Peter answered, "God's Messiah." Jesus warned them not to tell this to anyone, and he said, "The Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law, and he must be killed, and on the 3rd day be raised to life." But they didn't understand. Then about 8 days after these sayings, Jesus took with him Peter and John and James, the inner 3, remember, and went up on a mountain to pray. And while he was praying, the appearance of his face changed, and his clothes became as bright as a flash of lightning. Suddenly, they saw two men talking to him. They appeared in glory and were speaking about his exodus, which he was about to fulfill in Jerusalem. Now Peter and his companions were weighed down with sleep, but as they awoke, they saw his glory and the two men who stood with him. Just as the two men were leaving, Peter said to Jesus, "Master, it is good for us to be here. Let us set up 3 tents, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah," not realizing what he was saying. While Peter was saying this, a cloud came and overshadowed them, and they were terrified as they entered the cloud. Then came a voice that said, "This is my son, my chosen. Listen to him." When the voice had spoken, Jesus was found alone. And they kept silent, and in those days told no one any of the things they had seen. The next day, when they came down from the mountain, a large crowd met them. A man in the crowd called out, "Teacher, I beg you to look at my son, for he is my only child. A spirit seizes him, and he suddenly screams. It throws him into the convulsions so that he foams at the mouth. It scarcely ever leaves him and is destroying him. I begged your disciples to drive it out, but they could not." "My disciples of little faith," Jesus replied, "how long shall I stay with you and put up with you? Bring your son here." Even while the boy was coming, the demon threw him to the ground in a convulsion. But Jesus rebuked the impure spirit, healed the boy, and gave him back to his father. And they were all amazed at the greatness of God. Now today, we might suspect that the boy was suffering from epilepsy, but to Luke and the people at that time, they had no other way to explain it other than a demon or an impure spirit. But any way you want to explain it, Jesus healed the boy. Now, while everyone was marveling at all that Jesus did, he said to his disciples, "Listen carefully to what I'm about to tell you." And for the second time, he tells them, "The Son of Man is going to be delivered into the hands of men." And again, they did not understand what this meant. It was hidden from them so that they did not grasp it. And they were afraid to ask him about it. One day, an argument started among the disciples as to which of them would be the greatest in Jesus' kingdom. Knowing their thoughts, Jesus took a little child and had him sit beside him. Then he said, "Whoever welcomes this little child in my name welcomes me, and whoever welcomes me welcomes the one who sent me. For it is the one who is least among you who is the greatest." So as the days drew nearer to the feast of Passover, Jesus resolutely set out for Jerusalem. And he sent messengers on ahead who went into a Samaritan village to get things ready for him. But the people there did not welcome him, because he was heading for Jerusalem. Now when his disciples James and John saw this, they said, "Lord, do you want us to call fire down from heaven to destroy them?" But Jesus turned and rebuked them. And then he and his disciples went on to another village. And this is probably one of the reasons that Jesus gave these two brothers the nickname Sons of Thunder. They don't seem to stop and think before they speak, do they? So what happens next? Look for Bible Shorts episode 105. Tell my sister to help me.